Welcome to Conversations on the Coast, San Francisco's premier author interview program. Today we're going to talk about things like Duck, Duck, Goose, Goose, and Duck and Goose. Yeah, those are titles of books. They're written and illustrated by our guest, Tad Hills. And the publisher is Schwartz and Wade Books, which is an imprint of Random House Children's Books. And are we glad to have you on board?
Thank you, Jim. It's good to be here.
What we are welcoming here, according to what your publisher sent along, is painter, actor, obsessive Halloween costume maker from Brooklyn, New York. Yes. Now, you're not getting away with obsessive Halloween costume maker without explaining yourself.
Yeah, well, I've always been, somebody who likes to make things. And as a kid, I always made my own costumes, or my mother would help. And when it came time to make costumes for my kids, I took on the job very enthusiastically. And so has this blossomed into a neighborhood business, or just no? It's blossomed into a neighborhood attraction, I'd say.
Okay.
So people wonder, what's going to be coming up next year.
What's the weird guy going to do?
Don't know yet, but
yeah.
But in the past, my daughter Eleanor last year was a cello, and my son a cello.
A cello. Mm-hmm.
Made out of recycled cardboard, and my son Charlie was the Empire State Building one year, and then last year he was the Chrysler Building.
Wow. Well, the kid's into real estate. They're kind of grooming him to be the next Donald Trump.
Yeah, maybe.
Let's get serious for a minute. You have written or published at least 2 books. The first one was Duck and Goose. The new one, just recently released, is Duck, Duck, Goose, which is a sequel.
Right.
And you have had incredible success. 2 children's books, 2 books on the New York Times Book Review Children's Bestseller List. That's incredible.
Yeah, well, I'm lucky too, I guess.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thanks.
And you are very successful, at least by that measure. And but you do have one desire in terms of the designing. You said in an interview, every day I wish that I could make art with the simplicity and fearlessness that my kids do.
Yeah, I do. It's true.
That's something that your grandmother said about you, too, I think, isn't it?
Well, I'm sure that she felt the same way when I was growing up, and I did a lot of art with her. She was a painter, and as a kid, I did a lot of art. And now, as a parent of 2 kids who are very artistic and creative, I just am always impressed at how pure their art is, and how sort of innocent and
fearless. I like
fearless,
that word.
Yeah. And without baggage. And whenever I start a new project, I'm always excited to attack it and be very free and loose with my paint or with my pencils or whatever I'm using. And usually, what happens is I end up gradually tightening up and becoming much more rigid, and it's really tough to do. Becoming
the grown-up that you don't want to be at that moment. You also talk about the process of creating a book having a similarity to sculpture.
Yeah.
And it becomes something standing, of course, but that's not all there is. You have to make sure that it's fun and interesting from all angles, because kids will be walking around it, squinting at it, sniffing it, touching it, inspecting it from all sides. I love that metaphor, because it's kind of what kids do, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is exactly what they do. And also, in terms of making art, I feel like, whether it's acting or maybe even dance or painting, music. I don't compose music, but I imagine that there are so many. I feel that there are so many similarities in the way that you for an effective piece of art to work it has to be dynamic, and it has to be something that from all sides can be looked at from all sides, and it just works. And every mark in a drawing, there should be a reason for every mark, and just like an actor should, every step or every movement should be justified. But then you've got to do it in such a way that is natural, not,
natural for the audience.
Natural
that
for the
you're
audience,
designing.
yeah.
For those who in themselves are fearless designers.
Right, it's got to look natural.
You came to a point in the first book, Duck and Goose, where you actually had to enlist your children solve a problem.
I did. There was a spread where in the story you see what Duck and Goose are each thinking, and in their thought bubbles they are wanting to keep this object that they find in the field for themselves. And so my idea was to have each one sitting on this object with a fence around them, and I couldn't figure out a way to make it more interesting and more. I thought it could be a good opportunity to make it funny.
All right. We'll come back with the kids' solution after these messages.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Follow us on Twitter at Jim Foster COC or send an email to jimfostercoc@gmail.com.
Tad Hills, author and illustrator, is our guest. The title of his new book is Duck, Duck, Goose. It's published by Schwartz and Wade, and he's also the author of another New York Times bestseller, Duck and Goose. When we had to break away, you were in the process of explaining to us how your kids solved the problem to get across effectively and quickly what Duck and Goose are thinking about. And tell us how they did that.
Right, so I knew I could do something funny on this spread, and I belabored it for weeks and weeks, and finally my son Charlie, who was 5.5 at the time, said nonchalantly, "Why don't you just have them put up signs?" And it was just really a brilliant idea that I would never probably have thought of myself. And my daughter suggested, since we have a sign outside our house in Brooklyn, New York, that says "No honking, $350 fine," she suggested, why not put a "No honking, $5 fine" sign in front of the duck's fence. So.
And over on the goose side of this, if you are a duck, keep walking.
That's right. Yeah.
All right. I think people are probably getting impatient, and I think, Tad, we better talk about Duck, Duck, Goose.
Duck, Duck, Goose.
The new book. Now, things are going along happily in the meadow as the book opens, at least in my judgment. But this new friendship between Duck and Goose is threatened, I think.
Right, yeah.
And there's a problem that they have to face. At least I think it's a problem. A younger duck by the name of Thistle.
Right.
Appropriately named, you say.
Yes, I think so.
Why?
I think, well, Thistle, there's a new duck in town, and her name is Thistle, and she is a bit of a nuisance. I think she's a cute and charming nuisance who won't go away. Duck loves her and is very happy to have a new friend, and Goose is a bit threatened by Thistle and would rather she went away.
Well, the reason he's threatened by Thistle, you state early on, as Duck and Thistle are running across the meadow. "Wow, you sure are one fast duck," Duck called after her. "I sure am. I'm probably the fastest duck in the whole wide world," the little duck boasted. And that's what Thistle continues to do.
Right. Thistle is very, very competitive. I think partly because it's her nature, but also because she's very excited to have a new friend in Duck, and perhaps wants to take Duck's attention away from Goose. And so she's constantly trying to impress Duck.
And continuing to challenge, belittle, that's a good word,
Goose.
Belittle. You know, Duck, Thistle said once 3 butterflies landed on my head at the same time.
Right.
And she leapt into the air. She's a show-off, too.
She is a show-off.
She's a show-off.
And she's
3
highly energetic.
butterflies all at the same time. Isn't Thistle amazing? Goose, Duck, quack. Yeah, she's something, all right. Yeah. So you can see that things are not going well for our friend Goose.
Right.
And it keeps going on that way.
It does. It goes on, and until Goose is fed up and can't take it anymore, and takes himself out of the situation, and leaves.
Yeah, well, they want to race him up the hill. And the last one up is a rotten egg.
Right.
And Goose says, "Guess I'm the rotten egg."
And then there's a series of competitions here. Challenges on the next page.
The thing that's interesting is, as this goes on, Goose kind of puts out his philosophy. He says, not wanting to race up the hill, can't we just watch the clouds instead?
Right.
I mean, he's a nice guy.
Yeah, he is. He's a very nice, gentle guy.
At another point, when there are all kinds of challenges, hopping on one foot, walking across the log challenge, stick on your head contest, and a jump over a bush race. And Goose at this point says he's had enough. I'd rather look for butterflies, he said.
Yeah.
Now it seems to me something very interesting happens, or shortly thereafter, and that is that he goes missing. Goose does.
He does. He just heads out on his own, and I think it's important for kids to understand that it's okay for them to take themselves out of a situation where they're feeling uncomfortable, and that is exactly what
that's exactly what he does.
Yeah,
what he does.
Yeah,
and as we come to the end, if you will, of that section of the book, you've got Duck looking for Goose.
Right,
as it says in all their favorite places, the lily pond and the shady thickets and the riverbank.
Yeah.
And he's in none of those places.
Right, and you can see how sad Duck is now, and perhaps he regrets having sort of coerced Goose to compete in all these challenges with Thistle.
Okay. Well, the competition's about over. Duck can't find Goose, and then stay tuned.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Follow us on Twitter at Jim Foster COC, or send an email to jimfostercoc@gmail.com.
This is Jim Foster. It is Conversations on the Coast. The title of our book today is Duck, Duck, Goose. And it's written and illustrated by Tad Hills, who has also given us Duck and Goose, both books, on the New York Times bestseller list for children's books. School Library Journal says, Hills's, say that fast, Hills's gauzy oil paintings of a hazy, sunlit landscape and endearing animals make this book worth lingering over with a good pal. Now, if they want to linger over you some more and find out more about you, is there a way they can do that?
Well, as of now, I don't have my own personal website, but they could go to randomhouse.com/kids, and from there they could find information about me.
Okay. Now, how do you get to this, what School Library Journal calls gauzy oil paintings of a hazy, sunlit landscape? What do you start with?
Well, I start with when I first started doing the illustrations, I really didn't know what Duck and Goose were going to look like, and took months really to figure that out. I didn't know what kind of paint I was going to use, and eventually I found that worked best for what I was after was it's oil-based paint, but it's water-soluble, and it worked so well for me, partly because it acts just like oil paints, but it's soluble in water. So that means that I could do the illustrations in my house at my kitchen table, and not worry about my kids running around and smelling up the house with the solvents. So they are water-soluble oil paintings.
Wow. And then you do this and then send the painting itself, the watercolor, off to...
The oil paint, yeah, I send it off to the publisher, to Random House, to Schwartz and Wade, and they design the book and figure out where the text is going to go, and then they send it off to the printer.
And you both wrote and illustrated this book.
Yes.
What came first?
I always write the stories first.
Story first?
Right, and then the illustrations follow.
I don't know whether gauzy is the word, but the paintings are calming, and they're simple and direct in terms of the colors, mostly primary colors, And I don't know, there's just something very, very effective about them.
Yeah, they're bright and they're simple, and there's not a lot of mystery to them, I think. I don't know whether I'd call them gauzy either, but...
Well, you know, critics.
It's a nice compliment.
Right. Critics and interviewers, what the heck do they know, for goodness sakes? I want to get back to the book. My friend Duck is at last, Duck hung his head and sat down by their favorite bush. "Oh, Goose, where are you?" he said, wishing that his friend could hear him. And he turned to the next spread, and this is the happiest spread in the book, because on the one side of the bush is Goose, and on the other side of the bush is Duck. From behind the bush came a familiar honk. "Goose!" Duck called out. "Duck!" answered Goose. "Goose, where have you been?" Goose sighed. "I don't like to stand on my head." "No," said Duck. "Actually, I don't either. And when I hold my breath too long, I get dizzy. We all do. That's universal." "Me too," said Duck. "And walking across a log scares me." Duck looked at Goose. "I thought you did a great job, but Thistle won every time. She's very talented." Duck nodded. "I think she had lots of practice." "You know," said Goose, "hopping on one foot is fun for a while, but sometimes I like to sit and smell the flowers." "Or listen to the river," Duck added. "Or feel a warm breeze," said Goose. "Or look for butterflies," quacked Duck. And, here we're now right back where the first book ended. Kind of, the kind of life that they had.
Right.
Or even kick the ball. There it is. Kick the ball around the meadow. A ball that in the first book they thought might be an egg.
That's right.
Yeah. "Hey, good idea," agreed Goose. So suddenly, out of the tall grass, who shows up?
Our friend Thistle.
Thistle. "Wow, you guys are good hiders," she quacked. "And you're a good finder," said Goose. "What should we do now?" asked Thistle. Now, this is really a clever idea. "I think it's time for a nap," says Goose. Duck pretended to yawn. "I bet I can fall asleep faster than anyone." "Not faster than me," Goose said. "I'm the fastest faller asleeper ever," Thistle bragged. Typical Thistle bragging.
Yes.
"Okay," said Goose. "Whoever falls asleep first and sleeps the longest is the all-time best," Duck quacked. "Champion napper," Goose honked. "In the whole wide world," shouted Thistle. And luckily for Duck and for Goose, Thistle was the best sleeper.
Yes. You should do the book on tape. Very good.
Friendship is behind both these books.
Yeah.
And another part of friendship, which I'm sure never gets into children's books, the harm and the hurt that can come from friendship with, let's say, the best of intentions.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
Well, this has been Duck, Duck, Goose, and Duck and Goose Day. The guest has been the writer and illustrator, Tad Hills. This has been Conversations on the Coast, and I'm Jim Foster.
Follow us on Twitter at Jim Foster COC, or send an email to jimfostercoc@gmail.com.